Oxford from the inside. The good, the bad, but always the truth.
Hi, I'm Mary. Welcome to episode 17 of Oxford from the Inside. The good, the bad, but always the truth. Today we're joined by Siam and Immy. Would you guys like to introduce yourselves, starting with Siam?
Hey guys, I'm Siam, second year chemist at Trinity College, and also another interviewer for Oxford from the Inside, but Mary's taking the role this time.
Hi, I'm Immy and I'm also in second year and I do history and French.
Perfect. So yeah, welcome to the podcast. Today we'll be talking about what you can do during your gap year. So I suppose a really obvious first question is, why did you make the decision to take a gap year? Do you want to start this, Immy?
So I'd initially applied to Bristol, but on results day I had really good A-levels, and I'd always wanted to take a gap year, but my teachers had discouraged me because they thought I might have a bit of issues getting into university with it, and they didn't really know many people who'd taken them before. But once I had the security of having my grades, I wanted to give Oxford a chance. And I'd had exams for way too many years at this point, so I needed to recharge a bit. And I took both French and Spanish for A-level, and it was just a perfect opportunity really to improve both of those as well.
I'd say for me, so I didn't get into Oxford for the first time, and I really liked the Oxford chemistry course. It had lots of maths, and I wanted to continue doing my maths after further maths A-level, and I was really close to going to Bath, and it was in August, a few weeks before university. My friend Adam, he said that I could go to university, or I could take a gap year, earn money for 6 months, and travel, which I've always wanted to do, and have the time to do lots of other things. And whilst I'm here, and then go to Bath next year, and it's only a year later, and I'll have lots of travelling to do. And whilst I'm here, I could reapply to Oxford, which was the main university I wanted to go to, the main course I wanted to do. And it was one of the best advice I've ever been given. It worked out really well for me.
It sounds like gap years were like a really good choice for both of you and that you really enjoyed your gap years. But what were your initial worries about taking a gap year? Siam, would you like to start?
So the main worry that lots of people, I think the main worry that the universities have is that you're going to be out of touch with your subject, especially if it's a subject that requires you to do it like frequently, like maths or imagined languages, if not all subjects. So I think if you're going to take a gap year, you should use some of the gap year to keep up with your studies. That's really important. I know all of the admissions people I've spoken to have said that is like paramount. And so for me, because I was reapplying, I know the admissions tutors have said to me as well that what they say to people who are reapplying is that you should use your gap year to make your second application much, much stronger. So what I did was I revised a lot for my admissions tests, which don't exist anymore for chemistry. And I made sure I was really on top of my A-level chemistry for the interviews, just like because I'd done the A-level, I had my revision notes and just was like made sure I was a lot sharper and read into university stuff that was relevant to A-level content in case those things came up in the interview, which they did, and that really worked well for me. So I really tried to keep up with the chemistry and the maths because both of those things could come up in the interview. And my second turn of interviews were much, much better than my first. So yeah, I think and worries from students, I'd say, is that there's like a worry that you're going to miss out on like the hype train, if that makes sense. Like everyone doesn't make sense apparently. As in, and I think university is very exciting, and you don't want to be that one person not going, and all of your friends are going to university, and it seems like you want to join everyone and go straight into it. But there's so much. If you have a lot to do in a gap year, and you really want to, I wouldn't let that worry of missing out, fear of missing out, stop you? Don't know about you, Emmy.
Well, so for me, I didn't worry so much about missing out because all of my friends were going to different universities anyway. And I knew I'd have that experience the following year, so I don't think that's something you should worry about at all. For me, my main worry was how do I pay for the gap year, and am I actually going to be able to get a job? So I applied on results day. I applied to a teaching course. It's called a CELTA course, where you learn how to teach English in Spain. And luckily got an interview and got onto that. But my issue then was after that month of the teaching course, I had no full job afterwards. So it was sometimes an impromptu gap year can be a little bit stressful. So it was quite a lot of worry there. But I did manage to find another job teaching in France afterwards. But I was applying to jobs because I did French, German and Spanish. I was applying to jobs anywhere in the world that spoke either French, German or Spanish. But yeah, so I had no guarantee of a job there. So it was a little bit of a worry. But also I agree with Siam as well. I was a bit worried whether this would affect my entrance to university. So first of all, whether, so if I didn't get into Oxford, whether I'd lose my place at Bristol. So what I did then was I contacted Bristol and just checked that I could defer before I said I'd have a gap year, so then my place was secure. So I definitely had something to fall back on there. And I spent my year engaging with both of my subjects, both French and history. So again, as Siam said, as long as you continue to show engagement with your chosen course, I think you can only really gain from a gap year.
Also,
yeah, that's really
sorry, Mary. In terms of like pragmatic advice for how to fund your gap year, so how I personally did it was I worked as a barista, and I think my hourly rate was about £7.50. I worked for 6 months, 30 to 40 hours a week, and I was able to use that to fund my travels. I personally chose to travel somewhere where it didn't cost too much, but besides the flights. So like many people, I went to Southeast Asia. I stayed there for 3 months, and I did Camp America afterwards, which is like you work in a summer camp in America for 2 months. You pay £800 over installments throughout the year, and then you get paid back that money whilst you're there, and then your visa lasts for another 4 weeks after Camp America. So I travelled for 6 months and worked for 6 months on a £7.50 hourly rate. And I think, can't say anyone, but most people could try to find a job that pays that kind of rate. I mean, at the moment it's obviously harder to find a job, but I guess what I'm saying is that if you have a job that pays that well, and you can have that job for six months, do about 30 or 40 hours a week, you can do lots of things on your gap year with that job.
And also, for one thing, is lots of people worry about university is incredibly expensive. That was one of my worries as well going in. Was actually how I was going to be able to afford with the maintenance loan, how I was actually going to afford going to university. And that's one thing I was able to do on my gap year, was to earn some money, and that way when I actually came into university, I had a bit of a cushion. So I had less to worry about there as well.
Oh, it seems that there's quite a lot of advantages to a gap year, I guess. You can make a little bit of money, but also have amazing experiences that you probably wouldn't have otherwise. And you can take a break after your A-levels when your brain is completely fried, which is definitely an upside, yeah. So in terms of university applications, how much do you feel that your actual application improved through taking your gap year? Because obviously that's a very, very important thing to happen. Like, that has to happen if you're going to get into the university post-gap year.
So I think it gives you a whole new perspective, really. So I think with the break from academia, because before kind of just going through a factory and churning out students, and it lets you actually take some time for you and to really find out what you enjoy. Because reading alongside A-levels, you can do it. I did it first time round when I applied, but you can't really, there's always in the back of your mind your essays or your your problem sheets that you've got to do. So when you're on a gap year, you have a bit of space, so you can actually fully get into your subjects a bit more. So that, I think, it really improves your application. And for me, well, helpful for me living in France, given I was going to do French, but it also really helped me for my history, because I took history lessons with the students at one of the schools that I was teaching at, and that way I could see history a bit more from the French perspective as well. And they asked me about this in interviews. So I think it just gives you a little bit of something extra in interviews than the average A-level student.
Immy, do you think that spending time in France and immersing yourself in that culture and in the language, where it's spoken, helped with your application and made you a stronger candidate?
Yeah, so it certainly helped with my French skills, and it's so in your third year you always have to do a year abroad anyway, and everyone's language massively improves. So I had the advantage of actually going into university already with that experience. So it was easier for me in oral classes, even grammar classes. But what you can't do on a gap year is be complacent. You need to make sure that you do actually work a bit on, so I attended some French lessons just to make sure that my writing didn't slip while I was doing a lot of French speaking. It was often with French teenagers, so I was more French slang than proper French. So you do actually need to make sure what you're doing is also a bit more relevant.
Do you know if many languages students take gap years to immerse themselves in that culture and the language in the countries that they're learning the language from?
So I know a couple who have, yeah, and also some who have already lived in those countries as well. So I, for instance, had lived in France from when I was 5 till I was 7, but I know people who've lived in Switzerland or Germany or whatever language they're taking, or if they are actually French or German or Spanish to start with. So people come in at university at all sorts of different levels of language. But I don't think that's something you need to worry about if you're not taking a gap year as well, because there is always the year abroad in third year, which very much catches you up to the same standard.
That's really good to know, because I suppose there is pressure on language students. They feel like they have to do a gap year to do the language and things.
Yeah.
Because I was originally going to apply for French and linguistics, and I remember thinking that, and it stressed me out a bit. But just obviously not worry anymore. But yeah, that's good that they know that. And Siam, what about you? Do you feel like your application improved during your gap year?
Yeah, I'd say, yeah, as building on from what I said before, yeah, it improved massively. I think, as you were saying, and I know lots of people who took a gap year to reapply, and they've all said that applying to Oxford or any university during a time when you don't have your A levels and they're finished, it gives you so much more time to do revise for the application process, and you have so much time. You perform a lot better because you don't have A levels at the back of your mind. And in other ways, my personal statement was a lot better in the second time round because I had 2 years of chemistry to write about rather than just the 1 year. And it was like I just sort of went back to my old one and made it better. And I was able to, and I had a lot of time to read around the subject, which really helped in first term of chemistry, definitely. So it really, I definitely felt, I remember coming into university and there's a lot of things that I was like, oh, I've seen these things before. Not at the moment, the second year it sort of runs out, but it did help at the beginning, because you just feel like if you've studied your subject during the gap year, you do come in more confident because you've done a bit of reading beforehand.
I guess a similar question for you as I asked Immy. Do you think there's many chemistry students who have done a gap year?
I don't think so. So I think it is the stigma of there is quite a big fear of scientists taking gap years, because if you stop studying a science for a year, I'm sure it's the same for humanities, but there's a fear that you will be out of touch. Having said that, I do know a few physicists and a few mathematicians who took a gap year, and what they all did, including myself, is that we kept up with our studies. And as Immy said, don't try not to be complacent. So I was doing I remember towards the summer, like a few months before university, I'd go over past maths papers just to make sure that I was still on track and like still able to do those things, because I'd be expected to do that at university. So yeah, yeah, not as many people, but that definitely shouldn't stop you. How I with like logic worked out that I think this is going to be a good idea for me. It just makes sense. I'm going to make sure that I'm not complacent, make my application better. And even though lots of people around me wasn't doing that, I thought I was going to go for it. And I feel like if you feel the same, that viewers watching, then they should go with that instinct.
Yeah, I suppose that's true. And the application process can be such a huge burden, especially when you're trying to do your A levels. I remember finishing my interviews and being completely burnt out, and then I had mock straight away, and I was just drained. So yeah, so it probably was nice to go through the application process. Yeah, exactly, recharge, and yeah, tackle the application process with a fresh mind, for sure.
And one thing as well, I think, is just when you come into university, you've had a year of not learning, and you really appreciate how much learning gives you. So I went in and I was really more hungry, I guess, to find out more. So, yeah.
I felt the same as well. It's so true. You like realize how much you like learning, and it's I think time away from studying does that, and like with anything as well, time away from it just like builds that makes you realize how much you like doing the thing that you do every day. Whereas if you do it every day, you can become a bit distasteful towards it, for sure.
That's good to know though, because I know a lot of people say that they're scared that they'll go on a gap year and then realize that they never ever want to come back to studying again. So it's nice to know that it's proof that you love what you do if you find that you want to go back to it. So yeah, that's really, really nice.
But building on from that, a gap year is really good as well if it shows you that you don't like what you're about to apply for and you have other interests, and then you apply for a completely different degree, and that's not a failure at all. That's actually a massive win, because if you realize that you don't want to do the degree that you're about to apply for before you study it, then that's really good, because a lot of people realize that as they're doing it, and they realize that for a lot of people 18 was too young at a time to choose what degree they want to do, and they didn't really realize what was their main interest. So I think like taking a gap year can give you time to check, is this the right course? So like my friend, he's taken a few gap years and really wants to make sure what course he wants to do. He's Swedish, so in Sweden it's quite common for people to take a few years out to work out what degree they want to do. And he came across this maths and climate change course. He read a book about climate change, and now he's dedicated to combat that. And even though like to a lot of people it looked like he was messing about for a few years, but he's now going to do a degree that's fully invested in. So there is a big benefit, like taking your time to choose what degree you want to do.
Especially at Oxford, because it is such an intense workload, and if you don't genuinely love your subject, you will have a miserable time, because you are working a lot of your time. So yeah, definitely, I think that's so important. So yeah, you guys have sort of explained what you did in your gap year, and you guys did a lot of traveling. But is there anything you can do in your gap year that isn't traveling, like for the the whole year?
I mean, I didn't really. So I didn't do what Siam did. Although I was abroad, I mostly stayed in two places in Madrid and in northwestern France, doing teaching and then a teaching course. But so that's more working really, rather than traveling, even though I did get to obviously visit those places and around the area. But then I did then get to meet lots of people there who I got to go traveling with later. So I think lots of people, they might not go traveling, they might just work. It doesn't matter where you work, whether you're working in England. I met someone who worked as a tour guide, lived in the Lake District and worked in the Lake District as a tour guide. And that's perfectly fine. You don't have to do something, you don't have to go to South America or somewhere overly exciting in your gap year. You just have to do something that's good for you. Whether that's earning money to help you support yourself throughout university, whether you just need a break from studying to do something else. You don't have to go to Thailand. it's not all about your gap year, as everyone talks about, where they went to all sorts of amazing places. It just has to be somewhere where you get to take a bit of a break and get to know yourself more, get to know your subject more, and have some different experiences that you wouldn't have had otherwise.
No, yeah, I personally entirely agree. How me and my friend who also took a gap year and he didn't travel at all, how we tackled our gap years were we wrote down like a list of things that we've always been meaning to do, and now we finally have the time to do them. And I would say like use your gap year to do those things. So like I've always wanted to ski, so I learned how to. I like found a dry slope nearest to me, learned how to ski, and then event like self-funded myself to go skiing. And I also wanted to read a lot of books that wasn't to do with chemistry, because I knew that this was probably the best time, the last time I'm going to have to be able to do that, which isn't true now that I've studied. Like I've still had lots of time to do other things. But anyways, I still delve into my other interests. My friend, what he did was quite amazing. He really loves music, and he fully delved into that. He taught himself how to sing, play the piano, and he's always wanted to do that, and he's quite extraordinary at those things. He learned a few languages. I mean, not fluently, but he like dabbled into them. And like I think there's any interests that you have. I don't know, but maybe you want to dedicate your time to your sport, or your like learning a language, or like you want to paint. Anything that you really find a passion for, and you can use that gap year to do that. It's so like, because it's time for you to do stuff that you really want to. It's like retiring, but when you're 18 and you now have so much time to do all of these things that you've wanted to do before you go to university, before you have to study for these exams. And so yeah, and those all of those things, and there's loads of things, don't require you to travel. Yeah.
So it's nice that there's not one set thing you should do in your gap year, and I guess it's really important to make what you want of it. So that's really good to know. And you guys, obviously, because you did do some traveling or you lived abroad, you lived independently and had that experience before coming to university. So how did you find that initial experience of living independently?
Terrifying. So I moved to Madrid, and I was suddenly living with a 31 and a 32-year-old in a flat who were both Spanish, and I had A-level Spanish, but still there were things, I didn't know the word for dust, for instance, or like teaspoon, and there were just odd words like that where I just look at them and just have no idea what they were saying. So that was a bit scary. And this is also prior to free roaming in Europe. So when I went, I had no contact with my parents or any friends, anyone I knew, for the first 3 weeks, because the flat I had, they'd moved there as well, and there wasn't any internet, and my phone didn't work in Spain, or it's incredibly expensive to send messages. So I had to sort out a new phone contract, rent, no internet, all of that in Spanish, but without a handy Google Translate to help me on my way. So that was terrifying. But yeah, so now luckily there's free roaming in Europe, so that's a bit less for you guys to worry about. It's definitely a little bit of a shock to the system. But I think you just need to make the most out of every opportunity. You're cooking by yourself, you're meeting new people, and just need to speak to as many people as possible, and try and stop you from getting lonely, really. So just fully get stuck into life there, join the local football team or your orchestra or something like that, and just talk to as many people as possible. So that definitely really helps when you're living independently.
For me personally, I'd say there's like two main things that really helped living independently. One of them is that I realized how much I enjoyed like time to myself, and that was completely okay. Like that kind of idea, like, oh, you can't sit at lunch by yourself. I realized, or like go to a restaurant by yourself. I just realized very quickly that made no sense, and sometimes I really like that. And when you're traveling independently, you have this like constant choice where you're in this hub of like lots of social people that want to get to know each other because they're all traveling independently, and you can join that, or you can actually decide, oh, this evening I'm gonna like take some time for myself, and that's a very useful skill for university, to be able like that it just sort of dismisses that fear of missing out. And the other thing was that there's a few things, but living independently and traveling really helped with like being confident and meeting people, and that really helped at university. And especially because you're around people that also want to get to know each other, very similar to first year of uni. I remember coming into university, I found it very easy to go and talk to people because I've been doing that for quite a long time. And also, if you were to live independently and go traveling, things go wrong all the time, and you really learn how to deal with that. And you have this confidence and ability to be able to fix like problems going, like things going awry. And then you come to university, and I really wasn't worried at all about like the things that could go wrong at uni, because they just weren't as traumatic as the things, not traumatic, but they weren't as difficult as the things that could go wrong when you're traveling. So I remember everything feeling very confident, thinking that my room was like just like another hostel room, but a private room where like no one can steal my stuff because there's like a locked door, and people don't tend to steal stuff anyways in hostels. But what I'm saying is that I felt very confident coming into first year because of my experiences traveling, socially confident and internally secure. Yeah.
But the Oxford college system's like a family anyway, so you've got a huge support network there when you do actually arrive, both in college and university wide. So, and there's Freshers Week as well, which lets you get to know everyone, and the college is so small, so you don't just get to know your own year group, but you get to know all the way through, you know, up to fourth year's master's students as well. So it's really just a big family. So if anything, I think more than preparing you for uni, a gap year probably prepares you more for life, really, where you don't have that family support network close by, but it certainly means you're ready to tackle absolutely anything when you get to university.
Yeah, that's a really, really important point. You learn so many life lessons in that year, which I don't think I'd be confident to go and live in a country by myself with people that I don't speak the language confidently, and you know, like deal with rent and things. So you guys have learned so much, and it's so impressive to see. And I guess that shows in everyday life at uni. I suppose gap year students just seamlessly fit in easier than others who struggle and maybe feel homesick and things. So it can actually be a benefit to take some time to live independently before coming to uni to make that transition easier. So yeah, that's really interesting. And Immy, you said that you were doing the CELTA course while you were away, and that was around the same time as your admissions test. So how did you balance doing the CELTA course and preparing for your admissions tests in Spain?
Okay, so that's one thing that I probably wouldn't recommend doing on your gap year. So the CELTA course, usually it's done in about 6 months to a year, but ours was crammed into 1 month, which meant we had incredibly intensive days, and I was working probably solidly from about 7 a.m. till 10 p.m. each day. And with no internet at home for the first few weeks, I very much had to stay and work for that. But yeah, so Oxford interviews on top was a little bit of a struggle, I have to say, but it's meant that, because I do a dual honours degree as well, which is quite intensive, it's meant that I'm, well, quite prepared to do a lot of things in time pressure. So great help for time pressured environment, although for anyone else, I'd probably recommend taking a bit of a break and working towards your admissions tests separately. Because what I had to do is, I was living in Spain and I rushed back, spent 4 days in England, took the admissions tests, and then went off to France to start my new job. So all of it was a little bit stressful. That's not to say you have to go home to take your admissions tests either. If you're living abroad, in every major city there are test centres, so you don't need to worry about that either. Just have a little bit of a break if you can.
Yeah, that's really, really interesting. But it does show that it can be done. So if you are immersed in another project, you can fit that in alongside it. So yeah, that's really good. Really good to know as well. So there's just a few summary questions that I'd like to ask you guys. the first one is, overall, do you recommend taking a gap year? Siam, do you want to start?
So I would recommend taking a gap year if I don't know if this helps, but if you want to, as simple as that sounds. However, if you do take a gap year and you want to make it productive, and like even productive in the sense that you really want to enjoy it, it does require, you do have to plan it out very well. Say, if you don't plan the gap year well, there is a problem where like 6 months might go past and you didn't even notice, and then those 6 months you won't get back. I think a lot of us could relate to that with quarantine just happening.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think if you're going to take a gap year, whether it's to reapply or you want to do things that you've always been meaning to do, or you've got better grades, I would plan the gap year so that you get as much out of it as much as you can. Because I do know people who took a gap year, they didn't plan it out, and the year did go by, and they feel like they wish they'd done more. So yeah.
Yeah. I mean, my gap year was 100% unplanned, but yeah, I would agree with Siam that you have to plan it, because if anything, it just makes it a little less stressful. But I'd definitely say it's worth it from both an academic and a life experience standpoint, just because you do get that extra time to actually get to know your subject, find out whether you do really love it, or whether it's just something that you thought you had to do all the way through. And that'll really help you whilst you're actually doing it as well. And then you're less likely to change course, I think. But I made some absolutely fantastic friends who I'm still in contact with, and it means I've got people now who I can visit when I'm abroad. I got to travel Europe with them at the end of the year, and just had a fantastic time. So yeah, I'd say make sure you get out of your comfort zone on your gap year. Even if you stay at home, do something different, broaden your horizons a bit, make that year count.
Also, I want to say, just for like, because there's like a stereotype that students that take gap years are like middle class students who like their parents fund their gap years, etc. And there's that like stigma and stereotype. But I wanted to say that me personally, my parents didn't fund any of my gap year. I fully funded it myself, and a lot of my friends, I come from quite a rough neighborhood, and none of my friends went on gap years, and I very much wasn't the stereotypical person to do that. But I wouldn't let your background or culture or where you've come from or the fact that you don't have any money, because you can go and try and find a job, stop you from taking a gap year. Obviously, like having that job secured beforehand feels more reassured, but you can find it during the gap year. But and as my friend didn't work throughout his gap year and did things with his newfound time, and didn't travel and just used his time to do different things, you really don't need money to take a gap year, and if you do, you definitely can earn it, whoever you are.
That's sort of part of the reason why I took one anyway, was to earn money for university. So really, there is no one gap year student at all. Whatever you do, however you fund it, it's all about personal development, really.
Mm.
Yeah, that's really, really nice to hear. And I think that's really, really important because, yeah, like you said, it does have that rep of being like middle class people. But yeah, no, anybody can take a gap year. And if you want to, just do it. Yeah, really, really good. And what were the main skills you developed throughout your gap year that you could apply to your life at Oxford? Or at uni in general, I suppose.
Well, a lot of my skills were teaching, which I suppose is sort of coming helpful now because I'm on my year abroad and I'm currently working as an au pair. So that's part of my Oxford degree, I guess. But just from a confidence standpoint, I taught, well, secondary school, but also adults from 26 to 67. So you really have to be confident teaching people who are older than you, and just having the confidence that what you're saying is right, you know what you're doing. And I think the same thing applies to university. In essays, for example, you need to have self-conviction to put down arguments that you've come up with that you haven't seen in a book, and find a bit more creativity, and just have the confidence to do that. And I think just, a gap year probably helped me out with that, as well as budgeting. So at uni, it's very helpful to budget, just to make sure that you've got enough money to go out with friends and things, but that you don't go into your overdraft as well. So that was very useful in my year abroad. And just sorting out things in a different language certainly helped my French as well. But generally, confidence, I think, is key.
I think, I was going to say budgeting, but it's fine. But budgeting did massively help me. And especially, I think, because in the way that I travelled, I really wanted to travel as long as possible. So I stretched out the money as thinly as one can. And I think that really helped at uni, because I knew that, I was always conscious of how much I was spending, but in a non-stress way. But I knew that if push came to shove, I would always survive, because of my experiences in my gap year. And I think confidence socially, as I said before, and inner security, and problem solving, daily problems, because I had a lot of experience of that. I can't think of anything else. Oh, and also, because I'd spent the year doing so many things I've always meaning to do, I had time and to realize what kind of things I like doing. So when I came to uni, I was quite decisive in what societies and stuff I'd want to do, but also open to new things. But also I had less of a fear of missing out, because I felt like I got that thing off my chest with the gap year, had my time to enjoy doing lots of things, and I was quite happy to still do lots of new things at uni, but it was okay to get cracking on with studying now, if that makes sense.
So it's these are lessons not just for university but for your entire life. They'll help you through everything. It's really, really good. And then the last question, what is your top piece of advice, or top pieces of advice, for students who are considering a gap year?
So just in a brief sentence, say yes to everything. Someone asks you if you want to go somewhere with them, say yes. If you want to try a new thing, just say yes. Really, and it'll work well for university as well. You just need to get out of your comfort zone, and you really, really won't regret it. As long as it's still safe, or fairly safe, but never be afraid of doing something. Even if you are at the start, you might be absolutely terrified of going out and meeting new people, or just trying something new, but you absolutely won't regret it. So say yes.
I think just to reiterate, even though you said before, but to make sure you keep up with your studies and improve your application throughout the year. But also in building on what you're saying, Immy, I think in terms of pragmatic advice, I think if you're traveling and you're a bit apprehensive of your safety, a good rule of thumb is to be out during the day and make sure that you're back into your hostel by night. And if you want to do things in the evening, there tend to be in most hostels people who will be going out to do stuff, and then you can tag along with them instead of going out by yourself. If that's I know, because I know lots of people who the idea of traveling scares them because they don't like the idea of being alone. I think it's very different traveling around during the day compared to at night. So that's
one thing as well is just try and make as many friends as possible. That way you aren't going out alone at night, and you do have a support system in place when you're there.
Yeah, exactly. But there's lots of advice, things like safety and how to travel in a clever way for your safety. There's loads of things online as well. Lots of advice from past travellers.
That's amazing. Yeah, thank you so much for that. So yeah, that's all we have time for today. I really appreciate you talking to us about your experiences and your advice, and I think students will find this really, really useful. And I've learned so much as well. It's incredible. I might do a post-uni gap year. So yeah, thank you for everything. Make sure to follow us on @Oxford from the Inside on Instagram, and we are Oxford from the Inside on Facebook, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. And yeah, I hope you're all staying safe, and we hope you enjoyed today's episode. Take a look on the Instagram and all those other social media sites for our other episodes as well. But yeah, thank you so much, and we'll see you soon. Bye.
Bye.
See ya.